Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. As I'm sitting here talking to you, I've got a cracked rib. I've taken x-rays and obviously some grazes to my elbow. And in this episode, we're going to do something different, kind of an analysis of what actually happened. I've still been trying to figure it out. How did I manage to fall here on this very ordinary road, ordinary gravel road? And so I've kind of used the sort of true crime analysis to try and figure out what exactly happened. Even though it was me, it's still quite unclear exactly how I managed to fall. And so that is what we're going to do in this episode. If you're not interested in mountain biking, you might just be curious about the environment, the terrain. You might just want to look at the pictures. So if you're interested in that and you're interested in this content, please subscribe to the channel, like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So all of this took place about a week ago on Monday, the 21st of March at around 11 a.m. with 11 kilometers remaining on a 55-kilometer stage. It was the third and final day of a 3-day mountain bike event. And as I say, for no apparent reason, I hit the deck right here hard enough to actually crack a rib. And fast enough to peel my elbow like some kind of exotic red banana. As you can see, the road is almost as smooth and obstacle-free as it's possible for a dirt road to be. And if you look just over the horizon of the gravel road, that speckling of houses and hamlets in the distance is Prince Albert, the finishing point. I have an idea that actually seeing Prince Albert caused me to relax a little, probably a little bit more than I should have. But that doesn't explain why I fell here and not, for example, here or here or even somewhere down here. In terms of my metadata, I wasn't even pushing that hard at the time when I played Superman on gravel. My heart rate was slightly elevated at 137 beats per minute, but well below my maximum for that day, which wasn't even that high either, 142. The speed, the average speed for that day was 27.4, maximum was 47.1, and I fell while I was going at about 32 kilometers an hour, which is fast but also not extremely fast. The temperature also was comparatively mild at 28 degrees Celsius. I think on the first day it went up to 37. So I don't know if one could really say that it was the weather, that the weather was responsible. But I'm also not sure to what extent it was simply a case of human error. Certainly human error was involved, but to what extent, that's the question. The route profile immediately preceding this fall wasn't really exhausting. In fact, towards the end, it was mostly gradually downhill. So it wasn't as though I was physically exhausted from having just gone through a very technical terrain. So the question remains, how the heck did I seemingly fall at random in this spot? So to be clear, for those of you not familiar with South Africa and with Prince Albert, Prince Albert is a beautiful little town in South Africa's thirsty Karoo region. If the Indian Ocean is on the one side of the daunting Swartberg Mountains, Swartberg means Black Mountains, and the Swartberg Pass, which was actually ridden over on the first day, you have to go over these spectacular mountains to reach Prince Albert and the dry farmlands beyond. You can sort of see the ridgeline of those mountains on the far left of this image, running from the one side of the horizon to the other. Now, if we are going to apply some of the rigorous critical thinking that we use in true crime analysis to this fall, we've got to start by getting a statement, a version. So here's my version of events. I was riding with two other strong riders, Gavin and Paul, probably the strongest riders in our group of about 20. And in fact, they'd actually caught up to me from behind with about 12 kilometers to go, 12, 13 kilometers to go. In other words, remaining on that 55 kilometer route. I'd gotten a slight head start because I left the water point maybe a minute or two before they did. And so after they passed me, I did pick up the pace slightly. I wanted to stay in touch with them. It wasn't that hard because the route was undulating and mostly downhill at this particular point. But I was sort of going slightly, let's say, slightly above my comfort zone. They were just a few bike lengths ahead of me, and we'd been riding like that for a couple of minutes when I came over a slight rise in the road. So I'd come over the rise in the road, and I reached down for my water bottle. I took a sip, and I was reaching down to put the bottle back in the cage when I suddenly saw a wave of dark gravel flying forward right in front of my nose and glasses. In other words, there wasn't a moment where I thought I was falling or I felt like I'd lost my balance. There wasn't a moment of panic or vertigo or anything like that. It was just one moment I was riding, the next I was in the dirt. And that's why it's kind of mysterious what happened. I jumped up pretty quickly. I think there's a bit of a instinctual feeling for someone in that situation. You're lying in the dirt, you want to not be lying in the dirt, just in terms of your survival. I sort of got up pretty quickly. I sort of spat the dirt off my lips and mouth, and I noticed a metallic grey vehicle. It's one of the three vehicles that accompanied our group. It pulled up almost at exactly the same moment that I got up. I didn't actually even know they were there. I didn't hear it. And so I actually asked them a little bit later on, did you almost ride over me? Were you riding like right behind me? And they said no, they were already sort of to the one side. Anyway, someone came running out of that vehicle with a bottle of water. I used a couple of bottles of water to wash the sand and gravel off my elbow. Although it was a very hard and unexpected fall, so unexpected I didn't know to even put a protective hand or arm in front of me. I mean, I actually hit the ground sort of chest first, probably the side of my chest first. Even though I didn't do that, I thought I was relatively okay. I was sort of in mild shock. My arm was burning, but it was nowhere near as painful as it actually looked. And so for a few moments I hunched over. I was trying to catch my breath. It felt like I'd been winded. It felt like the air had kind of been knocked out of me. I looked over my shoulder at the two riders and then a third guy as well, growing smaller, and I sort of wanted to get back on my bike and continue. So I sort of thought I was battered and bruised, but okay enough to continue. I felt a slight bruised feeling against my chest, and even ultimately afterwards there was no external bruising to my chest. But I didn't seem to be injured otherwise. But when I reached for my bike with my left arm, when I reached for the handlebar with my left arm, I suddenly felt like a stabbing pain in my left side. Since I tend to ride one-handed with the left hand, and since the left side was injured, and since it was difficult to extend my left hand, I could imagine riding further and then not being able to control the bike over corrugations or loose sand that we'd encountered many times on this particular ride, and then falling again and making the situation worse. So while I was recovering at the side of the road, I actually did tell the guys I'm going to continue until as I sort of reached for the bike and try to get on it. I actually did mount the bike, and I was feeling what that felt like, and that's when I really felt this excruciating pain on the left side of my chest. And then while I was sort of waiting there, a few more riders trickled by. Some of them asked how I was. One of them, the doctor, stopped to check on me. He just really wanted to know how my lungs were, because you can sometimes get a punctured lung in a situation. I said my lungs were okay. I felt okay. My breathing was fine. I thanked him, and then he left. But here's the mystery. If I was reaching for my bottle cage with my right hand from the right side of the bicycle at the time of the crash, and let's say I'd lost concentration as I was telling everybody, why didn't I fall on the right side? Why was what turned out to be a cracked rib and the grazing of my arm, elbow and shoulder all on the left side? So that's kind of the mystery here. And that's also why I took this image, to try to figure out why I'd fallen and where. So what do you think the reason is? If we invert the colors, you can see a little more clearly how the front wheel, and I think that's in the foreground, appears to sink slightly into the softer gravel substrate before suddenly turning right. And then right in front of that are, I believe, the impressions I made plowing into the gravel at 32.1 kilometers an hour. It's hard to say, it's hard to be specific which track leads to the wheel sliding out. Bear in mind, a few bikes passed by this way after I fell. There was one or two people walking over the area as well. So, if you want to talk about a contaminated crime scene, the tracks you're seeing here also include a couple of bicycles moving over that as well. I don't think many moved over that central area, and that's, I think, also the area that I fell on. If you asked me which track was I riding on, was I on the left or the right side, I can't say for sure. I think I was on the left side. I think there was also a third rider, and obviously the vehicle behind me, that could probably provide a witness account for definitely which side I was on, and also how my bicycle fell. Did it fall because the front wheel swung quickly to the right or to the left? And so that they could probably provide a witness account as well. In terms of some self-analysis, I do think the I just lost concentration thing has a little merit. On Monday the 21st, that morning, my watch actually warned me when I got up with this message. It said, recovery time delayed, poor sleep slowed your recovery, try resting more today. So even my watch was saying that I'm unusually fatigued. I know I did have a particularly poor sleep on the third night, but poor sleep isn't something it's not something new to me. I often don't sleep very well. But I definitely had, of the 3 nights, the first 2 were definitely better than the third one preceding this fall. At one point after midnight, I downed a triple Jack Daniels just to try and give me some relief, just so that I could stop thinking and head off into dreamland. When I woke up that morning, I was definitely groggier than the first 2. And, on the first morning, I was the first to arrive at breakfast. On the last, I was the last to arrive. Another reason my concentration was likely impaired was at the previous water point, I'd noticed my water bottle was hanging precariously onto its cage, sort of on the end of a screw, and it was just completely swinging around. My bicycle is actually lying down in front of the others in this particular image. Although I was cognitively aware that the bottle cage was loose, in fact very loose, I think I was so tired, not so much physically tired, but a kind of mental exhaustion, based on lack of sleep, but also based on dealing with tricky terrain and all of the loose gravel and corrugations we had to navigate on day 3. There were quite a few riders who fell on day 3. I was the last to fall, and I'm the only one, I think, that fell on such a weird sort of unchallenging terrain. One rider described the first part of the day as her worst 30 kilometers ever, or words to that effect. And there was another rider who fell quite seriously. But I think I simply didn't get round to sorting out my water bottle. I think I had the mentality of, well, we're almost there anyway. We're almost at the end. I also think because there was someone dealing with an emergency, someone who was bleeding, our attention was on her and our conversation was on her, and in a way that sort of became the priority. Something else that happened at this water point, as I say, was there was a member who'd cut her elbow, as far as I remember, from a fall, and it was decided that she was going to go to hospital to get stitches. So her race ended maybe 5 or 10 kilometers before mine did. And then there was at least one other rider who also fell, not as badly, during a prior section through very deep gravel. The rider on the far right of this particular image fell badly, also on his chest, on the very first day, down a very steep section of the Swartberg Pass. And so it was within 3 to 5 minutes before my fall that the ambulance actually passed me with the injured, bleeding rider. As such, when I fell, the ambulance, the medic, wasn't around to treat me. I didn't know it at the time, but it was a pretty serious fall. My fall was pretty serious. I knew it was hard, and I was surprised I hadn't actually broken anything. But the point is, the ambulance passing me was a sort of alert. And a second alert occurred very close to that moment, in other words, very close to my fall, just before my fall, when I hit a short section of extremely rough corrugations at speed. Now, obviously it wasn't the first time that had happened. What was a first was that this hitting of the corrugations was so sudden that it actually managed to shake the handlebars loose out of my fingers. So I actually lost the grip of the handlebars, but somehow emerged on the other side with both hands still on the handlebars, still maintaining this sort of slight control over, the direction I was going in. My hands weren't still circled around the grips. They were simply just on top of them, not holding them. So that was a lucky escape. And so I kind of had two huge wake-up calls telling me effectively to pay attention. So I thought I was paying attention. And then I went over this little rise, and it was basically 10, 11 kilometers, the last 10 or 11 kilometers to go on our 3-day mountain bike epic. And there I saw Prince Albert below in the distance, and I knew this sort of adventure was coming to a close. And so I think a part of me was relieved and I suppose relaxed a little bit. And because the road was tilting down slightly, that's why I reached down for the water bottle, specifically because it was easier terrain. And I took a sip of water. I don't really know whether it registered at this point that the cage was loose. I don't know whether I had forgotten that it was loose, but I do think I kind of looked down to see if the bottle was going in, because I'd put the bottle previously into the cage even though it was loose. And I think I was sort of feeling it go in. I was feeling the bottle go in and then look down to make sure what was going on, and that's when I fell. But the just lost concentration argument doesn't fully make sense to me, because I'd just eaten about 10 minutes earlier. I'd also had something to drink, and the terrain was straightforward. Also, as I say, I didn't feel like I'd sort of overbalanced. I've often put water bottles into cages, so as I say, I knew the bottle cage was loose, and I was alert enough to be keeping up with Gavin and Paul, and alert enough to pull ahead of a lot of the other riders despite the tricky terrain. So what's the answer? Why did this happen? And why did it happen here? When I went to the bike shop, this is after I arrived back from the trip, to to sort out the bike cage. I didn't really have to take it in there. I just didn't really want to deal with it, and also just give the bike a proper clean and once over. I chatted to one of the riders who works there. So he's not a professional rider, but he is very good. He's a guy who rides a lot, very experienced, very fit, very strong. He actually came third in a recent local race. It was something like 75 or 100 kilometers, so he sort of made the podium in that race. When I told him of my stupid fall, he said the same thing had happened to him on a mountain bike, the exact same thing. He said, 1 minute you're riding and the next you're on the ground. And so he explained to me that because the handlebars of the mountain bike are so wide, much wider than a racing bike, which is kind of what I'm used to. I probably did most of my riding preparation, not all of it, but certainly a substantial amount on a racing bike with narrower handlebars. You can sometimes overcompensate a little bit because you underestimate the width of the handlebars. So, while looking over your shoulder or looking down at your bottle cage, if you've only got one hand on the handlebars, sometimes even if you've got two, you might oversteer or understeer. In fact, in the very first 1 or 2 kilometers of the entire thing, I was sort of ahead of the whole group, and I was approaching a tree and a slight curve in the road, and I looked over my shoulder to see where everyone else was, and I sort of jerked a little bit to correct my line. And so it seemed like that was something similar, where I was going off my line based on my one hand changing the direction that I was going in, right? So that is what I think actually happened. I caused the wheel to slip out under me, and that's why I fell on my left side, because the bike turned, hit loose sand, and then basically swung suddenly to the right, and I kept going forward. Something else that I think was a factor was I may not have felt that initial slight subtle movement because my hands were quite numb. They were numb from the vibrations. That was the other reason I took the bike into the shop, was to put a kind of a foam, a foam cover on the handlebar grips, so that there's not so much vibration. There were times that my hands were so numb that when I reached down to get a bottle, I could see my hand around the bottle, but I couldn't actually feel that I was holding the bottle. That's how sort of numb it was, right, from the vibrations. So, to conclude, there's a saying, a grain of sand can break a machine. That's not what happened here, but it does show you how small, subtle things can sneak up on you, even when you're in total control, or when you think you're in total control. And then there's disaster. So I did know that my hands were numb. I was often shaking them. So it wasn't as though I wasn't aware of that either. But a few seconds of miscalculation in this case means 6 weeks of discomfort, 6 weeks of difficulty sleeping, and for me, the worst part, lost training. I really gathered quite a lot of nice momentum. My fitness was building nicely, and it just seems pretty depressing now to lose that. I might try and swim or something. I'm not going to not train for 6 weeks, but I might try and find some way to continue activity. I think it also shows when you see small things breaking down, like a bottle cage coming loose, fix it. When other riders fall, take extra care. Don't allow small things to accumulate. When you have a close call, stop, take stock, and pull yourself together. After arriving back at our guest house, I had the unenviable job of driving myself several more hours home. My girlfriend, I guess, could have driven. She could have taken over, I suppose. But I preferred to drive myself, given how many trucks were on the road. It was sort of a busy time. I think it was a long weekend holiday scenario. And so I just preferred to do the driving myself. And that in itself was a test as well, driving home after this crash. So the situation was, you've had a few alerts, you've fallen. Now, is that enough of a lesson to ask you to drive extra carefully? What more is it going to take to say, be careful, be defensive, be extra vigilant? And so I was, and I drove home. We got home safely under a spectacular electric thunderstorm. I think sometimes when the gods are angry, we must be extra careful. And if we don't know what the words extra careful means, well, the gods will show us. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.